Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today I am bringing you my February read and wrap up. I read 6 books in February and I'm laughing because they were all either 5 stars or 2 stars, nothing in between. I did also have 1 DNF, which I'll talk about towards the end of the video, but yeah. February was a weird reading month and I feel like this is going to be an interesting wrap up, but I'm going to kick things off with books that I read that are part of series. At the start of the month I picked up Fool's Assassin by Hobb, and then my last book of the month was Fool's Quest by Hobb. So these are books 1 and 2 in the Fitz and the Fool trilogy and I adored these. I gave them both 5 stars. Should have said actually that these are also books 14 and 15 in the realm of the Outlings, and I think because I've invested so much time in this series at this point, I'm really attached to the characters and I am terrified to read book 3, but I'm going to read it in March. And then I was thinking about doing a video where I talk about the realm of the Outlings, spoiler free probably, but I thought it might be quite interesting to talk about my experience with this series because it has been a roller coaster. I did not like the first trilogy within the realm of the Outlings, but this is fantastic. 5 stars for both of these, and like I said, I'm scared to read book 3. I then also picked up The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, which is the first book in the Great Cities duology. I think this was originally meant to be a trilogy, but it is now a duology. I had to keep double checking because I saw some places call it a trilogy and then I saw other places call it a duology. But there is only 2 books and I have already started the second book, so I'll probably talk about this series more in my March wrap up. But again, loved this. Gave it like a 4.5 stars. I read it while I was in New York and it's set in New York, so I think that contributed to my enjoyment. But I love N.K. Jemisin's writing. I love how intense it feels even when not much is really happening. This isn't like a super plot driven book, but the characters I thought were really well written. It's essentially about a group of New Yorkers who have to come together to defend the city against this unknown threat, and it's amazing. I loved this. I can see why it wouldn't be for everyone, but yeah, I need to read everything that N.K. Jemisin has written because I adore her writing style. So those were the books that I read that are part of series. I'm now going to move on and talk about the standalones that I read, and I'm actually going to start with a book that I finished in January, but I forgot to talk about it in my January wrap up, so I'm going to talk about it here because it is quite a popular contemporary romance with a sci-fi twist. The book I'm talking about is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I listened to the audiobook for this because I spotted it on Scribd, which is now called Everend. I keep doing that, but I listened to the audiobook for this and it was a good audiobook. I have no criticisms of the narration. I thought it was really well narrated and it kept me gripped the whole way through. It follows our main character Clementine, whose aunt recently passed away, and she has inherited her aunt's apartment. It's set in New York. I read this before I went to New York though, which is interesting. But yeah, basically Clementine is now living in her aunt's old apartment, and this apartment has this ability to send people back in time. So she comes home from work one day and finds this guy in the apartment, and it turns out that he is 7 years in the past, whereas she is 7 years his future, and it's a romance, so you can probably guess what direction it goes in. I didn't like the romance in this. I thought that things developed too quickly. The characters did start to grow on me the further that I got into the story, so I didn't hate the relationship by the end, but this isn't what I'd call a slow burn, and that's my personal preference. I actually found that I preferred the side plots that were going on. The main character works in publishing and I do tend to like books about publishing or that follow authors, so I enjoyed that aspect, and I also really appreciated how this book talked about grief. I do prefer romances that have harder hitting topics, especially when those topics are things that I am currently going through. So I think that did influence how I felt about the book overall. I gave this 4 stars, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that, but it was 4 stars because of everything except for the romance. Moving on to some books that I actually read in February, starting with Notes on an Execution by Danya Kukafka. This is literary fiction. I think it's marketed in some places as a thriller or a suspense, but I would say that primarily it's literary fiction. It's about this guy who's currently on death row awaiting his execution. He's been given the death penalty, but it's not really about him because the story is mostly told through the eyes of the women that he crossed paths with and that he affected by his actions. I liked that the focus was on the women and not on him, even though you do get some chapters that are told from his point of view, and it's written in second person perspective, partly like his chapters are written in second person, and I found that really uncomfortable, but in a way that felt deliberate. It was really thought-provoking, and I think ultimately that was why it was a 5 stars for me. Would definitely read more books by this author because I thought the writing was also really atmospheric. Next up we have my DNF of the month, and that was All the Light We Cannot See by Doerr. This is historical fiction. It's set during World War II and it follows 2 main characters. The first is a blind girl living in France and the other is a German boy who is from this small mining town, and him and his sister are orphans and they live in a children's home. This is extremely character driven and it felt very slice of life in the beginning. You're basically following these characters as they're going about their lives, and then obviously World War II happens and you see how that affects them. I didn't find it that compulsively readable and I was really struggling to keep my attention on it. I found that I never wanted to pick it up, and so I put it down. I got to around the halfway point. There's a possibility that my opinion on it might have changed in the second half, but at the point that I stopped, I just wasn't gripped. And that's the thing with historical fiction, if it's not gripping me, because I don't read it that often, I end up just losing interest. So yeah, I got to the halfway point, but I think this is a case of a book that is just not for me. Another book that turned out not to be for me was Dialect for Aunties by Sutanto. This is an amalgamation of a few different genres, but I would describe it as a comedy with a hint of romance. It has a second chance romance, which isn't my favourite type of romance trope. However, I didn't mind it in this. It was the comedy that I didn't like. I didn't find this funny and I gave it 2 stars just in case it's not obvious. I didn't like this book. I'm gonna rant about it, but in a non-spoilery way. If you want to hear my spoiler thoughts on why I didn't like it, I'll leave my Goodreads review linked in the description because there was one aspect that really bothered me and I kept reading the book hoping that it was going to be addressed again and it wasn't. So that annoyed me. But basically this book is following our main character Medi, who is set up to go on this blind date with a guy that turns out to be a creep. Something then happens and this guy ends up dead and Medi blames herself, which I didn't really understand, but I could get past it because I understood that Medi needed to feel that way for the purpose of the story. So she calls up her mom and her aunties to help her get rid of the body, and the story goes from there. There's a lot of shenanigans involving a wedding because this family are in the wedding business. You really have to suspend disbelief with this book, and I'm willing to do that to a certain point, but when the comedy isn't landing and when it's implying stuff is funny when it's really not, then that's where you've lost me. So unfortunately I gave this 2 stars and I was so disappointed because I loved Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by this author, but this has made me not want to pick up any more of their books. The final book that I have to talk about was probably my most disappointing book of last month, and at this point in the year I think it's actually my most disappointing book of 2024, and that's An Education in Malice by St. Gibson. I didn't see this coming. I loved A Dowry of Blood by this author. I think it was a favourite book of the year year that I read it. I know I gave it 5 stars. An Education in Malice was similar but also different enough that it didn't work for me, and I'm going to do my best to explain why, because I think some people would really like this. The story follows our main character Laura, who has just started at this new college. You follow her as she starts at this new college in the first chapter, and she immediately meets this older student named Carmilla, who seems very mysterious, but Laura is immediately enamoured by her. Laura and Carmilla are both in the same poetry class, and during Laura's first lesson, their professor praises Laura's work, and this sparks an intense rivalry between the two of them. Carmilla is very jealous because she has this close and inappropriate relationship with the professor, and the story kind of goes from there. It's really about Laura and Carmilla's relationship with each other, but also with this mysterious professor. The first third, I would say, tries to establish this tension between the two main characters, but I was not feeling it. I felt like there was a lot of telling and not enough showing. For example, we're told that Carmilla is a really popular student and she has a lot of friends, but we never see her interact with anyone really, other than Laura and this professor. The setup felt really rushed, and then I felt like I spent the whole book waiting for something interesting to happen, and it never came. I think that if you don't feel invested in the romance, then you're not going to enjoy this book overall, because all of the themes to me felt shallow and underdeveloped in comparison to the romance. Like, that was the focus of the story, but that wasn't enough to carry the story for me. So mostly I was bored, and I never thought I would say that about this book because it sounded so interesting. I am still interested in reading S.T. Gibson's other book that's coming out later this year, because from the synopsis I feel like that might be more my kind of thing, but this was disappointing. I would also be interested in reading Carmilla, which is the classic vampire tale that An Education in Malice is inspired by, or it's a retelling of. Not quite sure on the details, but I would still be interested in reading that because I've heard good things and it's a classic vampire story, so I would like to read it at some point and then I can compare the two. But that does bring me to the end of this wrap up, so thank you for watching. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye!